But I critique Sean Swain Martin's book, American Pope, because the whole book is a whole dissertation on why Scott Hahn is a wackadoodle fundamentalist. Scott Hahn, why is he a fundamentalist? Does he think that, dinosaurs are running around outside right now? Does he not want to give people driver's licenses because the Archon of Constantinople? No, because in Martin's book, he's a fundamentalist because he thinks you can use apologetics to convince people of the faith. Martin disagrees with him about one way to interpret a passage in the book of Revelation, things like that. And that Hahn thinks it's good to write a book about the way society should be. It is called It Is Right and Just. It's one of the most embarrassing. This book that Martin wrote is based on his dissertation. It was one of the most embarrassing dissertations I've ever read. But the idea that if he's a fundamentalist, then nobody is, and that's the thing. It's what conservatives have dealt with for 20 years. And liberals should have really learned their lesson by now. You're a Nazi. You're a Nazi. You're a Nazi. When someone's clearly not a Nazi. And then when a real Nazi shows up, it's like, there's a Nazi. Oh yeah, sure. It's the boy who cried Nazi. So if you misapply labels, no one will take them seriously. I also recommend if you'd like to see more of the problem of fundamentalism, I have an episode called The Heavy Burdens of Catholic Fundamentalism. I would recommend there. And notice the thumbnail game, thanks to Thomas West, and your support, by the way, is why it has been severely increased. So, although as the years wear on, I am getting more and more grumpier, and I am getting more and more disappointed with you in every thumbnail. Number one comment is I love the Trent Horn Dad disappointed in you thumbnail. Alright, so now we got our last extreme Christian. How do we have someone who is very anti-conformity to society, but they're also very morally lax too? That's a wild one. And I have broken this one down into two types. The hypocrites and a group that I call the barbaric Christians. Barbaric Christianity. So how does that work? So a hypocrite is not someone who says one thing and does another. That's just a weak person. A hypocrite is someone who says one thing and believes another. They don't buy what they're selling. So a hypocritical Christian is someone who morally they're lax because internally they don't accept the teachings of the church or Christ. But they like being called a Christian. So they love it when the world hates them for being a Christian, and they revel in that identity that, look at how persecuted I am. But in their private life, they're pagan. They just enjoy having a persecution complex. So they are the bottom quadrant. They are morally lax, but anti-conformity because they love the world hating them and feeling special, even though they're not actually Christians on the inside. So they reject Christian morality. But there's another group of barbaric Christians. These are the barbaric Christians. And these are people who revise Christian morality. These are people who say they don't conform to the world, and they revise. So the world, they are very different from mainstream culture in the world. Very different from the mainstream culture. So they don't conform to the world, but also they revise basic Christian teachings in their favor. For example, in the 9th century, when the Vikings were being Christianized, many of them, before they fully embraced Christianity, they had a syncretistic mix of Viking paganism and Christianity. So they portrayed Jesus as a warrior Viking king. They thought a guy on the cross was absolutely weak. He had no aura, as the kids would say. Why would I worship this weakling on a cross? He has no aura. He's not based. So the Vikings said, this is our God, Jesus. He has a sword and a beard, a mighty beard, and he will cut down his enemies. And they'll misquote the parable where Jesus says, bring my enemies before my feet. And they allegorized Jesus' teaching to love your enemy. And so they just kind of conveniently skipped over the love your enemy part because the Vikings weren't terribly great at that. So it was crazy. They lived like pagans, and they wanted to be led by warrior King Jesus. So these two types, right? These two types, they're not mainstream, and they also reject Christian morality. And this could take the form of far left barbaric Christians and far right. So far left, this is a religious drag queen featured on the website Outreach. As a reflection there, Outreach is also, the editor of Outreach is that Jesuit priest whose name I won't mention. I mentioned to go. If you don't like it, this is on the Catholic website, send them an email and see nothing happens. But, so the far left, well, so like, even though mainstream culture is kind of for this, even this stuff is still on the fringe for them. But they will revise and they'll say, I'm Christian, I just reject the teachings on sexuality and life. So that's one. But then on the far right, and this is the one that will get me in trouble on the internet, but I don't care. Okay. The far right are individuals who claim to be Christian, but they are anti-conformity because they don't hold, because if I say, racism is a sin, if I went over to Balboa Park, San Diego Zoo, and did a survey, say, hey, I'm Catholic, do you think racism is a sin? Almost everyone I talk to would say, oh yeah, that's sinful, or that's bad. If I said to them, is sodomy bad, is abortion bad, we're going to have disagreements. If I asked these people, is racism a sin, they would say, well, what do you mean by racism? It's not a great start to answering the question. So the frog here is Pepe the Frog. It is a common meme that relates to a group on the far right. They're sometimes called Groypers. These are people are becoming much more popular on the internet. And what's interesting is in one post, they will talk about Christian love and charity and forgiveness and sound indistinguishable from regular Christians. But in the very next post, they will use malicious profanity, cruelty. They will talk about women being holes and femoids because they see women as kind of subhuman creatures. They will post under, there was a Catholic who posted an image of his interracial family being received into the church in Easter Vigil, and thousands of these far-right, barbaric Christians said they were sinful, evil, ugly, disgusting because they're in an interracial marriage. I hate being on the internet, but I have to be there, and it's out there. You don't see it in regular life because these people are cowards. They will not let most of them, they're online, they're anonymous, because, that way they can get away with what they say with no consequences. I put myself out there, I'm not anonymous. I'm willing to accept the consequences, even the fatal ones, because that's what Christians have done before me and will continue to do before me. That's what our Lord has done, the apostles did. I'm not worthy to carry their mantle. I'm doing my best to imitate them. There's a great meme, by the way, of 1 Corinthians 11:1. Paul says, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. And it shows Christ as Aslan, Paul as Simba, and then me as this really crummy lion drawing. It's I'll do my best, Paul. I'll do my best to follow that advice. And so the way that they will act and how they will treat others, it boggles my mind how these people act on the internet, because the Bible is very clear about how we should act. Let no evil talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for edifying, Ephesians 4:29. The Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kindly to everyone, an apt teacher, forbearing, correcting his opponents with gentleness. And these people do not. They believe that Christianity is in dire straits. They say Christianity is declined because we're weak. We're not willing to be strong. But strength to them is a performative masculinity that hides behind swearing, malice, insults. It's not a true masculinity that can put forward the truth confidently without having to do any of that stuff. And this group, I mentioned the Pepe the Frog, this was actually included in a USCCB handbook on symbols of hate on the internet for Catholics to be aware of. And by the way, the people, what they do is they're against interracial marriage, or at least they'll say, well, I have credential problems with it, blah, 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 blah. I would tell these people, you know what, this is the reason that Pope Pius XI wrote Mitbrenner Sorge in German and had it smuggled into Nazi Germany. Whoever exalts race or the people or the state above their standard value and divinizes them to an idolatrous level, distorts and perverts an order of the world planned and created by God, he is far from the true faith in God or from the concept of life which that faith upholds. For more on this, I would recommend the episode that I created 10 months ago, How Being Based Can Send You to Hell. And once again, it's all about being too far. The world, if the world compared me to many of these people, they would say I'm cut from the same cloth, because I am willing to say sodomy is perverted and transgender ideology is a mental illness. So they will just equate me with these people who will say that same thing, but then say horrible things about women, Jews, and minorities. And so I don't care what people think of me or what labels they put under me. All I care is that I am in a state of grace and that when I go to my eternal reward, whatever that may be, I will hear, "Well done, good and faithful servant." That's the only thing that we should care about, not the approval of men, but the approval of the divine. All right, but these are the extremes, and I feel like most of you are not on those extremes, but it's good to see where it is so you don't fall into them. And so I think for a lot of us, we're going to be floating, a lot of us with our temperaments, there's two kinds of things we're going to be floating between. Some of us have a temperament that's velvet glove. I want to get along with people. Some of the people are very conflict averse. I want to share my faith, but I don't like fighting with people. I want to get along with people and share my faith. And so, but then the other side, being more iron fist, people got to get over their hurt feelings. All right? I'm here to spread the truth. If they don't like it, that's their problem. We can be friends. I'm friends with them. Why can't they be friends with me? What's their problem? So there's going to be a spectrum, even amongst everyone here, between the agreeable and the prickly. And both have their virtues. So what you will then be called, I find that many people who are labeled, like people will label me a normie. I agree that the term is rightly pointed out if you just do everything that CNN tells you to do. COVID is bad. I really should bleach my tomatoes. Phew, man, that was a close one. Yeah. If you uncritically do what the world tells you to do, you rightfully earn the label normie. But if I think that women, married moms can go to another mom's house on a play date, and they're not violating the Catechism of the Council of Trent's prudential judgment that women should love being at home, I'm not a normie or a feminist. I'm just following what the church is teaching. So this normie label will often be applied from those in the anti-conformity ring to say, "Oh, you're just like cafeteria and progressive Christians. You just want to please them." And guess what? St. Paul was given the same derisive insult. And Paul in his letter to the Galatians said, "People call me a man pleaser, a people pleaser. I am not trying to please anyone. I received this gospel from Jesus Christ." But Paul also told people, don't be weirdos. When you speak in tongues, do it one at a time. Don't be a bunch of clucking, howling maniacs, because people will come into the assembly and think we're insane. He cared a lot about the truth, but he also thought you could be normal to people. And I'm sure people St. Paul said we can't speak in tongues, what a normie. So, you can't so I don't care what people call me, but to avoid the normie trap, what should we do? I would say, number one, have no other gods before you. Be very careful. We've been raised in a culture where we're indoctrinated. We're indoctrinated to believe, for example, I would, you do you. I would never tell you what to do, but here's what I believe. No, I will tell people what to do, especially if they're causing imminent harm to others. But we can do it without a blunt way. Or we've been raised to have to be cowering and apologetic to say, I'm Catholic, but I am sorry about the Crusades, and it was bad, and the church tried to stamp out science, and the church isn't perfect, and we're kind of groveling to the culture, when we shouldn't, when actually the Crusades in many respects were awesome. They were also awful. If you're Eastern Orthodox here, I am sorry about Constantinople, okay? Would you like to say anything about the massacre of the Latins? So, it's, you don't want to be one extreme or the other. Well, so one extreme is the church is horrible, and, self-hating Catholic in the culture. To be proud, but also not be so oblivious to the things the church has legitimately done wrong in church history, or some people proclaiming to be Catholic that have done wrong. So I recommend these books. They're in our bookstore over there by Steve Weidenhoff, an excellent church historian, The Real Story of Catholic History and the Glory of the Crusades. Let's put a few other ones here. So if you're you want to be an agreeable person, you want to share your faith, you don't want to fight people. But so you're worried about being called a normie because you want to get along with people. Well, what are some other advice I have for you? Let Christ be your shield. You're worried about people, you don't like when people attack you. Nobody likes that. I'm still not used to it. But let Christ be your shield and know that they're attacking you because they're attacking him. One time I was giving a talk, and a woman said, I was giving a talk on marriage, and a woman said, "You were the most hateful person I've ever heard. What you said offended me." I said, "Well, I'm sorry that I offended you. Is there another way I could have shared my message without offending you? Because I don't want to offend people. Could you help me? What are some words I could have used to give my message without offending you?" And she said, "Well, you should have said people who love each other should be allowed to get married. It doesn't matter if you're two men." I said, "Okay, well, notice here, that's not my message. So I didn't offend you. The truth offended you. So if you want to talk why you're mad at the truth, that's great, let's talk about it. But I wasn't the one who offended you. So when we engage others, we should let the truth offend, not us. Not be quarrelsome with people. Let the truth, and know the truth will offend them, and just not take it personally. Let Christ be your shield when the arrows are fired at you. Ask the right questions. This tip will also come up in the next section. When you ask questions, as Greg Kokel says, it takes you out of the hot seat and puts you into the driver's seat of the conversation. Now, when you ask questions, someone's hostile towards you, and you feel browbeaten, you put them on the spot, and they have to defend their incoherent worldview. You say, yeah, I know, like, you hate transgender people? No, I love everybody, but, can I ask you a question? Like, when somebody, do you think it's okay, like, if you saw, like, a man who is naked outside of a playground, would you call the police? Like, yeah, absolutely. Oh, okay, yeah, obviously. So, like, I have a problem, like, if my daughter is in, like, a bathroom and there's, like, a naked man there, what do you think I should do if that man says he's a woman? Like, help me out. Like, well, that seems really bad. And notice the tone being approached here. You're seeking help, and you're asking questions, and it lowers the temperature, and you're not making an argument. So ask the right questions. If you were more of a go-to-get-along kind of person, asking the right questions helps to dial down the temperature of the person you're engaging. And when you ask questions, by the way, to avoid the normie trap, you gotta control language. Don't give into the world's language and euphemisms. I try very hard. So for example, I try very hard not to say same-sex marriage. There's no such thing. Because if I say that, it makes it sound like marriage is just two adults, and I don't like this kind of arrangement between two adults. Same-sex marriage is like square circles, no such thing. So I use phrases like so-called same-sex marriage. I don't say homosexuality, I definitely don't want to say LGBT. I focus on an act, not people. People ask me the question, do you think women should be allowed to have abortions? Notice it's being shifted to persons. And I'll say, I don't think anybody should be allowed to directly kill human beings before they're born. So I'm focusing on the action. Are you against LGBT people? No, I just don't think anyone should commit sodomy, whether they have opposite sex attractions or same-sex attractions. And frankly, the sin of sodomy is primarily committed by people with opposite sex attractions. Well, we're not near lunch, so we let that process a bit more. And being fair in that. So I'm avoiding euphemism, but I'm not, the other issue, I'm not using slurs. I'm not going the other route. And finally, people will say, they'll say things like, oh, well, Jesus said judge not, or, we can do this radical thing in the liturgy because it's the spirit of Vatican II, and the church says this is okay. And bring receipts. Well, wait, where does the Bible say that? Where does the Catechism say that? Where does Vatican II say that we should have an interpretive Irish dance team on top of the altar, or whatever crazy thing is happening? Have the receipts to bring. So that's the one trap, is like, if you try to get along with the world and you're a more agreeable temperament, people might accuse you of being a normie. But you might have another temperament. You might be the kind of person who's like, hey, I share the faith, people don't like me, I don't care. So that you might be, so the idea is the normies are people on the bottom quadrant say, you try to be rebellious, but you're not really, you're one of them, not one of us. There's kind of a bizarro version that I would call the abnormies. And so these are people who might be more like center or left, who will acknowledge, hey, my side in the top quadrant gets a little lax on things. And I can see where the people in the anti-conformity wing, I see where they're coming from, but I'm not fully in that area. And theirs aren't called abnormies. I find that the left, when both sides, the left criticizes me, like they'll just collapse the right together. They'll just collapse all of it together. So like Charlie Kirk is Hitler, basically, which just shows you how crazy the world's become and how awful people haven't learned their lesson from that. And so they can be accused of that. To say, look, if you want to be a good Christian, you don't have to be, some people think, I gotta be normie, I gotta be clean cut, I gotta be, leave it to beaver type person. No, the Christian life is very rich and full. My colleague John Sorensen's over there. I'm a Christian who likes yacht rock. I love Toto, Christopher Cross. Actually, there was a great concert then where Toto and Christopher Cross together. They all got together to do Africa at the end. Amazing! I like that stuff. John likes the Raiders and heavy metal. And he's a solid Christian guy. And so there's room for everyone. And that's what we have to be able to show people. So I love this meme, look at this biker gnarly dude, like, oh, you're not a true follower. And then what's he doing? He's saying that Jesus, Spirit, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on me, a sinner. So we need the clean-cut people, but we also need Christians who are rough around the edges. Not sinful, but there are Christians who are in all cultures, reaching all people. But when you're rough around the edges, so if you're normie-ish, if you're conformed, there is a temptation to want to fully conform and please the world. And when you're kind of rebellious, there's a temptation to want to go full rebel or barbarian or fundamentalist. So how do you avoid the abnormie trap? Not be a LARPing crusader that wants to cut off the infidels' heads. There was a post I saw online I thought was really interesting. And it said that many people, it talked about how St. Peter took out his sword, cut off Malchus's ear. And it's just like that was, like, you're like, oh, Peter's such a coward. Peter had a Rambo moment, but I remember Rambo never killed anybody in First Blood. Later movies, like, that changes. But he cut off slaves, Peter was willing to kill for Jesus. He was based. He was masculine and manly. He was willing to kill for Jesus. He was not willing initially to die for Jesus. And I think there are many young men who are craving masculine role models, craving masculinity, and they want to be the kind of person who would fight for Jesus, even fight in a war for Jesus. And that's a good thing if it's a just war. And so, but many of them, they're not fighting people on a battlefield cutting off heads. They're just spamming people on the internet with really hateful comments. They'll kill for Christ, but they won't humbly die for him and let people mistreat them and just take that mistreatment. Jesus was not swearing at the Roman soldiers crucifying them. He said, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they do. So if you are a more rebellious type, remember that. It's so good to have that strength, but the greatest strength is not attacking and sometimes submitting to martyrdom, virtual or not. Let Christ be your scalpel, not your sword. Yeah, we want to engage sword. We don't want to have a blunt sword. We want to gently cut into the problems. We want to excise the tumor, not cut off people's heads. My enemy is never a person. It is always the fact, it is the error, it is the lie that has ensnared that person to the devil. Ask questions. Now, for the abnormie, the person who's more rebellious, if you were the person who rebels, asking questions, it brings down the temperature of the other person, but a lot of times its effect in the conversation, it makes you the calm one. When you ask questions, it helps lower the temperature so you don't beat people over the head. You're just asking good questions. And become gentle through patient practice. A lot of times I think people get really aggressive when they share the faith because they're out debating and they're worried they don't know something and they're going to get found out. But just say, hey, that's a good question. I know people looked into it more. I'm going to go get you a really good answer. So they're worried about that. And so they mask that fear with aggression when they're commenting or engaging people, hoping that the aggression will put off people and their weakness in their argument or their gap in knowledge will be exposed. But the more you defend the faith, the easier it is to be gentle and at ease with people, because you've seen it come 100 times. I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and black belts, it takes 10 years to get a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu. And they can turn me into a pretzel with ease, absolute ease, because they've done it 10,000 times. But the white belts, they're always like, they're all jerky and sloppy, because it's still very new to them. Your job is to become a black belt in evangelization. How do you become a black belt? It's not jiu-jitsu. If it's taekwondo, it's an art that doesn't have belts. If it's Muay Thai kickboxing, it doesn't have to be martial arts. You want to be a black belt in the kitchen. You want to be a black belt in crocheting. You want to be a black belt in ham radio. How do you become a black belt, an expert in something? You have to do it a lot. You will not be a great evangelist if you don't evangelize a lot. And you will not be a great evangelist if you're not willing to tolerate being a bad evangelist for a while until things start to click. As the people who are great, the people who are great are just not the people who gave up when they were not so great. By the way, if you like jiu-jitsu and you brought athletic clothes, pure coincidence, meet me at the second floor at 12:15. That's all I'll say. Second floor, 12:15. Just for a chat in athletic clothes. If you tend to be rebellious and fighting, then treat the internet like Chernobyl. Go in when your radiometer is high, like don't be there very long. Don't be terminally online, it'll make you cuckoo for Cocoa Bus. And have a spiritual director to hold you accountable. Have a spiritual director for that, and just be very wary. Finally, milk before meat. In 1 Corinthians 3, Paul says, there are spiritual mysteries I cannot reveal to you at this time. You're like babes, I give you milk, not meat. I think some Catholics, what they will try to do is they will be very provocative. And sometimes, and this is true, we try to kowtow to Protestantism. And we shouldn't have to do that. But sometimes they'll be overly provocative and offensive to get attention, because that works on the internet. And they'll share things that aren't as helpful. So someone made this meme about Mary's intercession. And there is a sense in which this is true, that Mary, all believers are entrusted to her, and so she prays for us. She prays for all people to be saved, just like we pray for all people to be saved. But the problem is, it's milk before meat. If you are a mature Catholic, you can see that. But if you're a Protestant and you come across this, what is the first thing you think of? Oh, a Protestant would say, oh, Catholics think that Mary does Jesus' job. And it's misunderstood. So you don't want to give people something they're going to misunderstand. And you also want to treat people like human beings. Like I saw this post a while back. Every single smart Protestant becomes Catholic eventually. No exceptions. You know, if you're Catholic, that might make you chuckle. But there's Protestants here at this conference. I've met them. They're cool people. I'm glad they're here. And I think they're really smart that they came here. And I'm not going to judge their intelligence based on what they may or may not do in the future. And think about this. Is this really ever going to work on some? I don't admit, it might work on some people. Like, a broken clock is right twice a day. But I think, Rosie, if you saw this and it just said, every single smart Catholic becomes Protestant eventually, oh, maybe he's right. No, you just roll your eyes like, what an idiot. So if you do that, what's the other person going to say? The Council of Trent, I did a poll recently on our Council of Trent YouTube page. And I asked them, what religious group do you belong to? And I asked, are you Catholic, a non-Catholic Christian like Protestant Orthodox, religious like Muslim Jew, or an atheist? And these are the results. I found them very striking. These are at 42,000 votes, so I think it's very representative of the percent of people who watch the Council of Trent. So notice this, 1/3 of the people who watch my Catholic YouTube channel are not Catholic. The Council of Trent gets 2 million views a month. So that means hundreds of thousands of people. That's who I want to reach out to. There's a lot of people, 5 years ago it was the far left in the church that hated me. Now it's the far right. Fine, I don't care. Those people on the bottom, those are the people I want to reach. And if you're Catholic and you don't like me, if you're not Catholic and you don't like me, that's what worries me. Because I want to really help you to know Jesus Christ and His church. And if you don't like me and that's a barrier from you knowing Jesus and His church, I want to amend that. And I think there's far too many Catholics today who are more worried about impressing other Catholics than authentically sharing the gospel and caring about other believers. And people who are maybe further from the truth, that's who I want to be able to reach out to. And that's our goal if we're going to evangelize them. And in order to do that, I'll close here with the words from St. Paul. In 1 Corinthians 9 and Colossians 4, I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. Conduct yourselves wisely toward outsiders, making the most of your time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that we know how to answer everyone. I hope you will do that. So, thank you so much for being here today.
Trent Horn. Nope, there's more.
One more. So in spring in Dallas, we are doing a conference. We will be having registration for that open in a few weeks. We had little signs out there. It could be confusing. It is an online evangelism conference. It is not an online evangelism conference. That's a mistake we made, and we're going to remedy that by calling it a digital evangelism conference. It is an in-person conference in Dallas, April 11th. We will have speakers. We will have 20, probably 30 Catholic creators there. We can seat up to 800 people. It's a Saturday event, one-day event, $70. $50 if you follow me or Joe Heschmeyer and get our discount code. I hope we'll see you there in Dallas on April 11th. So, thank you much.
Bravo, Trent. Hey, my friends, I want to show you something that you have caused with your generosity. So, first, while my colleagues are coming up here to the podium, I have no, that's not it. I have it somewhere. There it is. Okay, so with our challenge, so far, we've raised $70,114. Good. Okay, so I did some math. There it is. You can see it. So what that means is, if we want to get to 100,000, we need $29,876. Anybody here can pick up the 6, right? So $29,876 we'd like to raise before the end of the conference. Now here's another piece of data. This first figure, 70,114, that came from 50 donors here. And we have, today, we'll probably have, well, with the staff, close to 700 people here. So I feel like some folks are overrepresented, or some folks are underrepresented. Christine did some other math. You figured if everybody...
Thank you all who have given. We really, really do appreciate it. And for those of you who have not given yet, I think the math is if everybody gives